Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think is going to become more and more prevalent over the next couple of years. We're
Hmm.
talking about lab-made foods.
Lab-grown meat,
Yeah.
dairy alternatives,
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah. So synthetic ingredients, all that jazz. The global market for this stuff is projected to hit like, what, $1.5 billion by 2030?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. That's what a lot of these reports are showing. Big projections for this.
It's huge. It's a huge burgeoning industry. And I think a lot of people are excited about the possibilities. But I think there are also a lot of questions surrounding this technology.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we wanted to kind of do a deep dive, look at all the research that we've gathered, all the different sources that we've been looking at, and try to unpack this. What is it really? What are the promises? What are the potential pitfalls? And ultimately, is this stuff safe to eat?
Right. I mean, are we looking at the future of food, or is this something that we should be approaching with a little bit more caution?
Yeah, exactly. So let's start with, I guess, a little bit of a baseline. What exactly are we talking about when we say lab-made foods? What are the processes involved? I know lab-grown meat, for example, uses real animal cells.
Right. They take a small sample of cells from, say, a cow or a chicken,
Yeah.
and then they basically cultivate those cells in a lab environment to create muscle tissue that becomes the meat that you eat. It's essentially identical on a cellular level to the meat that comes from an animal, but you're not actually slaughtering any animals.
Right. So theoretically, this could be a huge win for animal welfare advocates.
Absolutely. Huge implications there.
Now, what about dairy alternatives? How are those typically made?
So a lot of dairy alternatives, they use a process called precision fermentation. It's kind of like brewing,
Oh.
You're using microorganisms in a very controlled environment to produce specific proteins, like whey protein or casein, which are the main proteins found in milk. So you're getting the components of milk without needing the cow.
I see. So it's like isolating specific components rather than creating the whole product from scratch. Now, one of the things that I saw mentioned in a couple of these sources was the idea of enhanced nutrition. So some companies are claiming that lab-made foods can be more nutritious than traditional foods, maybe higher in protein, lower in unhealthy fats, things like that. But there were also some concerns about the level of processing involved in creating these foods. Could that potentially impact the nutritional value?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions. There is the potential to kind of fine-tune the nutritional content. Like, for example, I was reading about how they can adjust the fatty acid profile in lab-grown meat to increase the omega-3s and decrease the saturated fats. That's something that's much harder to do with traditional animal agriculture.
Right, that's fascinating.
But then there's the question of processing. A lot of these foods are highly processed, and we know that processing can sometimes strip away nutrients or introduce new compounds that we don't fully understand the effects of.
So there's kind of a trade-off there. You might be gaining in some areas, but potentially losing in others.
Now let's talk about safety. That's obviously a huge concern for a lot of people. Is there any evidence to suggest that these foods are safe to eat?
Well, one of the arguments in favor of lab-made foods is that they're produced in these sterile lab environments. So the risk of contamination from things like bacteria, pesticides, antibiotics, those are all greatly reduced compared to traditional agriculture.
Yeah, I saw a few reports from the FDA and other regulatory bodies saying that they are monitoring this very closely and that they're conducting rigorous testing. But some of these studies also pointed out the potential for unpredictable health effects, specifically from certain artificial additives or bioengineered compounds that are used in the production process.
Right. That's the thing. We don't really know yet what the long-term effects of consuming these foods are going to be. It's such a new technology. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done. So it's not a simple yes or no answer. There are definitely potential benefits when it comes to safety from things like bacterial contamination. But we need more data on the long-term health impacts.
Exactly. It's nuanced. And there are other implications too, like think about the environment. A lot of people argue that lab-made foods could be a more sustainable way to feed a growing global population.
Yeah, less land use, less greenhouse gas emissions from livestock. That's a huge potential benefit. But some experts are saying that these foods shouldn't be seen as a complete replacement for traditional agriculture. They're more like another tool in the toolbox.
Right. There's still a lot of challenges that need to be overcome before we can even think about replacing traditional food sources completely.
Yeah.
Like scaling up production, making it more affordable, dealing with the energy requirements of these processes.
Right. So it's a complex issue. There are a lot of factors to consider. But ultimately, I think this is a conversation that we need to be having.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for consumers to be informed about the potential benefits and risks of these foods.
Yeah, and I guess the takeaway here is that there's still a lot that we don't know. We need more research, we need more data, but this is definitely a technology that has the potential to change the way we eat.
And it's a technology that's here to stay. So it's really up to us to decide how we want to engage with it.
Exactly. So as you're thinking about your own diet, your own food choices, I think it's important to ask yourself, what are your thoughts on these new technologies? What questions do you have? What information do you need to feel comfortable making informed decisions?
Yeah. And what are your concerns? I mean, what are you excited about? This is a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Absolutely. So keep those questions in mind and let us know your thoughts. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.